Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about something that really needs to be said. And I will be the first to admit, I like to discuss the science. I like to discuss things like movement patterns, range of motion, lengthened positions. But what we have to remember at the end of the day, a lot of influencers will massively overcomplicate this for the average lifter. Okay, a lot of these topics, when we're talking about this, we're oftentimes talking about getting to those deep muscle fibers, getting that last few percent for really advanced lifters, right? Really advanced lifters, people who have 5+ years of really consistent, continual hard training. Okay, that's usually what we're talking about. We're not talking about someone who's in their first couple years, someone who still has a little noob gains or any of that. We're not talking about the average person going to the gym. At the end of the day, a lot of these are things that you don't need to worry about. Okay, things like trying to squeeze a muscle or hit this perfect angle. If anything, I see people, one of the biggest mistakes I even see are people trying to control eccentrics so much that they lose range of motion. Okay, I think that's a problem. And I'm saying this as someone who's, again, almost 50 years old, over 2.5 decades in the iron game, having to rebuild after spending a year in bed sick, all sorts of stuff, who coaches full time. People overcomplicate these things, particularly when it comes to muscle growth. Really, with muscle growth, the questions you need to be asking are you working the muscles through a reasonable range of motion? Now, again, I think we should probably put a little more focus on the stretched or lengthened positions, again, according to the research, but it's not going to be a complete game changer for you. It's really not. And anyone who's telling you that is not being honest with you. Again, chasing that last 5% or 10% of your total possible gains as an advanced lifter, yes. All right. But if you're over here struggling to bench 200 pounds for 4 or 5 reps, a 300-pound squat for 4 or 5 reps is still your all-out limit. If you're in that category, probably not. It's probably not going to be a deal breaker for you, any of that stuff. Are you taking muscles through a reasonable range of motion? Okay? Hopefully getting close to the lengthened or stretched positions, or at least hitting them. Right? Are you performing quality sets? Quality sets meaning decent form to where you are actually working the muscles that you want to work, right? So, on bench press, are you gripping it wide enough? Are you not bouncing it off your chest? Are you, again, getting tension on the pectorals, particularly in the bottom half of the exercise, right? Things like that. So with curls, are you actually using the biceps, or are you just doing a half rep and then, unloading it to the top by curling, doing a wrist curl to the top, or are you actually working the bicep, through a reasonable range of motion, right? Actually getting the elbow pretty close to lockout, so on and so forth. Are we doing these things? Are you taking those sets really close to failure? I'm not even saying they have to be to failure. They don't have to be to failure. Are we getting within a rep or two of failure on the majority of our sets? Okay. Are we doing enough sets but not getting excessive with our volumes? Because again, as volume goes up, sometimes overuse occurs, sometimes inflammation occurs, sometimes we get really lazy with our training. So, are we keeping our volumes reasonable? What's reasonable? Around 10 sets, 10 to 12 sets. I would say as high as 20. If you're training really, really, really hard, as low as 6 to 8 sets per muscle group. But I will add the caveat, you better be training really hard down there. We better be over to like 0 reps in reserve on your sets, especially if you're going to do 6, and you better be picking good exercises, right? But that can be done, and people can make really good gains doing it. And they have made good gains doing it. Okay? So, sufficient training volume with sufficient work intensity through sufficient ranges of motion. Okay, are we doing all that? Are we getting enough rest? Are we getting enough recovery? Okay, that's a kind of a big deal, particularly for muscle growth. it can be useful. Muscle growth may slow down if we're not getting enough time between workouts even. Are you trying to pound away 6-7 days a week? You better kind of know what you're doing if you do that. I don't think the majority of you should be doing that. For most people, back over to you're not a really advanced lifter chasing that last 1%, 3-4 really good training sessions a week should be more than enough to maximize, at least 90% of your possible gains. At least 90%. Going back over to those volumes I recommended, the intensities I recommended, that many days, you're probably in a good place. Is your nutrition sufficient? Are you eating sufficient protein? Do you have any glaring deficiencies in your diet? Are your calories high enough to support building new tissue? I'm not saying you even always have to be in a surplus, but unless you're really a noob or a fair amount of body fat, if you're in a deficit, you're probably not going to gain much muscle. You may not gain any muscle. You may even lose a little. So, are you close to maintenance calories or maybe in a small surplus, sufficient protein, sufficient carbohydrates to fuel your training, right? These things. Any major vitamin or mineral deficiencies, have they been addressed? Okay? And I don't mean with supplements because that's probably not going to help you. I mean with food. And again, I'm not saying it has to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. No glaring weaknesses in the diet. Okay? Are you getting sufficient sleep? Right? If you were doing all these things, for the majority of you out there, the other stuff that we're talking about, are you doing a preacher curl into a lengthened position? Okay. Is the leg press you're doing putting that quad into the deepest stretch possible? How much are you controlling the eccentric rep? Okay, all of these sort of questions, things like trying to align muscle fibers with lines of pull, and I think that's complete nonsense. Right? All this other stuff contributes very, very little. And I'm not saying not at all. The other things are what are important. 95% of your gains will come from the other things. And if you are not making gains at all, I promise you it has nothing to do with these other complex factors. I guarantee you, almost beyond a reasonable doubt, that you are not addressing one of the other points that I made. You are not training hard enough on sets, quality sets, not doing enough range of motion. Your volume's not in an ideal range, which is pretty large. Maybe you're not getting enough sleep. There's a dietary deficiency. There's something like that. Those other basic simple things will constitute 90 to 95% of the muscle growth that you get. So if you're not getting that amount, you have missed something major. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.